Hello, and welcome to Building a Segmented Supply Chain Model. This is a special educational webcast where we're going to be sharing the findings of a recent research project that was designed to dig deeper into how organizations are applying supply chain segmentation strategies in the face of increasing globalization challenges. Now, my name is Michael Levins, and I'm Group Editorial Director for Peerless Media's Supply Chain Group, which includes Logistics Management Magazine. And I'm going to be your moderator for this special session that's being brought to you by our friends at Amber Road. Now, as we continue to cover in the pages of Logistics Management Magazine, global supply chain uncertainties continue to mount. Now, in the meantime, businesses continue to look to their supply chain operations to streamline business processes, reduce costs, improve customer service, and, of course, gain a competitive edge, which is becoming more and more important these days. Now, especially among companies with thousands of SKUs and diverse product lines. Now, there is a growing need for differentiating replenishment in those areas and logistics approaches across complex supply chains. For example, an organization may need supply chain processes that are specialized for goods with unpredictable demand, such as maybe the fashion, like the latest fashions that are coming out. The same organization may also provide goods with a more predictable demand that require a steady replenishment. Now, on a similar note, other goods may have higher import and export compliance requirements that must be carefully managed. Now, this division of product lines and SKUs based on factors such as criticality, selling cycle, and rate of sales is also known as segmentation. Now, to assess how businesses are pursuing supply chain strategies to support that segmentation, Peerless Research Group and Amber Road recently conducted a study to look at the ways organizations are collecting and analyzing information and how they're addressing supply chain complexities, as well as how they're going to be collaborating and communicating with sourcing partners and customers, especially within the context of those segmentation strategies that I mentioned. And we got a lot of data to share on that coming up in just a few minutes. Now, what we heard from our respondents is that businesses today are looking to gain greater knowledge and control over complex global supply chains. But what we also learned is that supply chain segmentation is one approach that organizations are embracing to help better manage supply chain resources and understand customers' buying behaviors. Well, today, we're going to put the findings of our research project into context for global shippers, and to help me do that today, I'm being joined by Stephanie Miles. And Stephanie is Senior Vice President of Commercial Services at Amber Road, and Stephanie leads Amber Road's professional services and support teams for the delivery, implementation, and ongoing support for the company's global trade management solutions. Stephanie, welcome to the webcast today.
Thank you, Mike. It's good to be here.
Outstanding. We're looking forward to it. Now, before we get started, I'd like to remind everyone that we're going to be doing a question and answer session after we made our way through several slides here. So please don't hesitate to submit your questions during the session, and we're going to get to as many questions as we can today during the event. But for those we don't get to, we're going to be forwarding off those questions to Stephanie, and she'll be able to get back to you via email. So we have a lot to cover today, so I'm going to spend just a few minutes going over some of the general findings from our research project before turning it over to Stephanie, who's going to then take us deeper into the segmentation-related findings, share some segmentation models, and also share how some savvy global shippers are managing their current segmentation strategies. Now, just going to move forward here. Now, the findings of the report are based on information collected from 929 top logistics and supply chain managers, and that's a terrific response rate for such a detailed type of research project. Now, respondents were predominantly logistics, distribution, or operations management, and that group made up about 20% of our respondents. We also had vice presidents at 15%. We had a lot of corporate management at 13%, and overall supply chain management, we had those folks come in. There were about 10% of those folks on there, so a pretty good sampling. Now, out of this group, we also had a really good sample of companies of all sizes. Just about 1/4 work at enterprises reporting revenues of $1 billion or more. Over 1/3 are at companies in the $50 million to $1 billion range, and another third report $50 million or less in revenue. So when you consider the high-level titles and diverse sizes, we're sitting with a pretty solid sampling of global shippers, with many different types of strategic needs. Now, when we ask them to break out their global revenue and sourcing costs, current versus future, Well, I don't think we have any really big surprises here. At the present time, we found that 21% of responding company sales are coming from international markets, with that figure expected to climb during the next 5 years to represent an average of 29% of companies' overall earnings. Now, correspondingly, the percentage spent on goods sourced globally will also jump, growing from an average of 26% today to 30% in 5 years. Now, in their sourcing, we also found during the research project that 40% of companies presently work with at least 20 global suppliers, and 12% now partner with over 100 providers globally. So the growing complexity picture certainly becomes a little clearer when you take a look at that interesting data point. Now, when we asked about their top supply chain challenges of rising transportation rates, fluctuating customer demand, increasing customer expectations, and global economic uncertainties are among the leading challenges and threats businesses encounter in operating their supply chains. And again, based on our coverage over the years, we are not too surprised by what's keeping shippers up at night. Now, historically, it's always been rates. But I found it interesting that customer demand and increasing customer expectations are coming in number 2 and number 3 on this particular list. Now, when you really consider how customer bases are shifting globally, and where and when product needs to be shipped, you can just about surmise that the majority of these concerns are a direct response to shifting global customer demands. And we're going to see later that's really what's driving the need for segmentation and better segmentation strategies. Now, while most of our respondents feel it's pretty critical to provide access to supply chain information and processes to suppliers and customers, many are encountering hurdles in making this happen. Again, not too surprising here. Inabilities are attributed to subpar technology or poor infrastructure on the partner side, inadequacies with their own internal solutions, or a failure in leadership or taking ownership of a solution. And those are the main challenges that we found across this pretty high-level database, or sampling, should I say. Now, it was interesting to see that 37% of this high-level respondent, they were capable of shouldering some of the responsibility and not just pointing a finger at their partners, which is actually a good thing to see. And I think you're going to see in a slide a little bit later just how much emphasis is being put on the investment investment for solutions. Now, we also learned that responding organizations typically gain connectivity with their suppliers using various means. Now, while most businesses, and that was about 88%, work directly with their suppliers via traditional phone and email communication, 28% told us that they're now networking with partners through an in-house web-based portal, which is a really good sign in the evolution of the shipper-partner communications revolution. So we're really happy to see that these folks are actually taking those steps. Well, as a result of these ongoing business process issues and challenges, and of course, organizations tell us that they are making technology investments to facilitate partner communications and build a supply chain segmentation model, particularly in the areas of transportation management, warehouse management, and inventory optimization. In fact, we were very pleased to see such a positive response in these areas from such a high-level respondent sample. Now, as we write month after month and illustrate through shipper case studies, these types of technologies allow companies greater degrees of control over their business processes that are required for different procurement, replenishment, and transportation strategies. So I found this slide of particular interest for the overall market. Investment in these key areas are certainly happening now. That was great to see, and it does go contrary to some of the earlier reporting we did in 2012. But it looks like some of the folks are really turning up the heat here, and there's some good areas where they're going to see that investment coming up. Now, let's start to take a look at how responding organizations are structuring their supply chains as we get ready to transition here over to Stephanie's portion of today's session. In fact, our results show that organizations appear pretty equally split on how they were structuring their supply chains. Now, respondent supply chain operations are typically centralized or are comprised of a mixture of centralized and distributed structure. And most organizations, are about 68%, are maintaining between 1 and 5 supply chains. So overall, the companies studied are operating, on average, 8 distinct supply chains. And we also found that those maintaining a greater number of supply chains were more likely to operate a mix of centralized and distributed platforms, while those running only 1 or 2 systems, they like to retain that control centrally. So we're going to get to a point here. We're about to, we're going to transition over to Stephanie. And Stephanie, you take it from here and kind of share with us some of those, take a little deeper dive here in the segmentation-related results, Stephanie, that we found from this research project.
Great. Thank you, Mike. If we take a look at this next chart here, you'll see that most companies are segmenting their supply chains by product. One of the benefits I have in my job is exposure to supply chains across so many different industries. And it's really true, no matter what industry we're looking at, they're really starting at a product level. And that makes a lot of sense because the buyers are typically grouped by what types of products they're procuring for, and it's aligned with their line of business. As you look further down in this graph, and you look at the other ways companies are segmenting their supply chain, it gets to be a little bit more complex. If they're segmenting by time to delivery, by lead time, by cost, it's requiring them to manage a set of data that's not typically available at a distinct segment level. So these are really more advanced companies who are taking a deeper dive into segmentation. And I think as we go through some of the use cases, you'll see that companies who have done that have had the ability to streamline their operations and lower some of their costs while making sure that they're servicing their customers. As we go on to the next chart here, I'm going to give you a couple examples of two of our customers, just an example of how we're seeing supply chain segmented. In this first example, the customer is the manufacturer of high-tech specialty machines, and they have grown over the years largely through acquisitions. They view their company really at a regional perspective, and so each region is responsible for their sales and marketing. Within the region, they do have different business lines, and there is some commonality of those business lines, although some regions have such unique products and they're sold nowhere else in the world. Moving down the chart, you can see from a system perspective, each one of the regions tends to have different systems. In fact, we see some companies, and this particular company has over 12 different ERP installations. So you can imagine as you employ a segmentation strategy, if you're trying to collect information that spans the globe, it would be very difficult for this customer. One of the things this customer is doing right now is they're deploying a business transformation process to create some common repositories at that base level down where you see the functional and the vertical, so that they're from a product standpoint, that their businesses across the world can tap into a global product master database. And just some simple actions like that allow segmentation to occur, but still information shared across the different functions and different segments of the supply chain that all need the same data. If we go to the next chart, this customer is a little bit more streamlined. They have global business units, and they're one of the lucky ones here who has a global ERP system. Their products, unlike the example we looked before, are relatively uniform globally. With the high-tech manufacturer of specialty machines before, we saw great variation in the products from one region to the other. So in this example, order life cycles are pretty much the same. It's a high-tech company. The products are the same. Their regional channels are slightly different, but are basically the same, thinking about direct-to-consumer, retail channel, and then the educational channel as well. So there are some variations within the channel, but what really makes it different from a segmentation perspective is that serviceability to the region. There are different regional requirements around the world in terms of how the customers are paying, how the goods are distributed, what models there are, and so the segmentation is really focused on that final aspect of the distribution. When customers are looking at relatively uniform products globally, what they often try to do is to delay the particular customizations until the last point possible in the supply chain. So if you just think about packaging as an example, if you have a common product, maybe it's pharmaceutical or maybe it's something that you see in multi-packs at a retailer, it would be much easier for the company to manage inventory if the packaging were delayed until that regional distribution decisions are being made and that final packaging and assembly. So if there suddenly became an inventory problem with one channel, the packaging could be applied and modified without it impacting the upstream order processing aspect. So there's a lot of opportunity here to delay some of the decisions for the customization towards the end, but it also makes the variability a little bit higher for the final distribution. So just two different examples we've seen from our customers and how they're handling segmentation. If we go to the next chart here, it talks about the actions taken to implement a supply chain segmentation strategy. As companies sit down and they say, how am I going to segment my supply chain? Most are taking a look at how do I optimize my sourcing and distribution decisions. And once again, if we go back to those previous two charts, those companies are taking a look at where's my supplier base and where's my customer base and trying to marry up and to group some common variables. Traditionally, customers are building, these models to figure out where their distribution centers are placed and think about this in a domestic realm. What we've seen our customers recently do and come to us for our help in is understanding what are the sourcing and distribution levels more to global scale. Everyone's looking at how do I expand my global market, how do I expand my revenues, and they're moving into emerging markets. Well, if I have a new market, a new region that I'm suddenly selling to, what is my best sourcing strategy for that region? Does it make sense to source from the same places I am today, or is there a preferential trade program maybe nearby that I could take advantage of that would provide a lower cost sourcing if I take a look at the total landed costs, including the duties and taxes? Also, from a distribution standpoint, it may make sense to think about where am I doing my final assembly based on who I'm selling this to and any preferential trade programs there again. So there's some more strategic ways folks are looking at optimizing their sourcing and distribution decisions, and as they move into looking at this from a segment perspective, they're able to really narrow down their specific supply chains to just focus in on those strategic projects, which of course would be grouped as you're looking at trade programs. You're not going to be able to find a trade program that's good for all of the products that you're monitoring, but as you segment products, you'll be able to narrow down on what trade agreements would be of benefit for you to leverage. The other aspects folks are looking at is planning customer fulfillment, managing global suppliers, and all of these activities have occurred for many years at a global scale. Certainly folks have been managing global suppliers before they even thought about segmenting their supply chain. The difference here is that as they start to segment their supply chain, they're realizing that the requirements aren't vanilla. They need to make specific requirements and specific process changes at a segment level in order to optimize that segment's performance. So perhaps there are certain documents that are required of some suppliers, like suppliers of toys, and those documents aren't required for maybe hard goods. So there's different document requirements. Certainly there's different packaging, there's different origin requirements, different handling, and as the segments become more specific, the global suppliers are being managed better. So exceptions are found earlier in the process. The origin logistics providers are asked to manage often those differences, and companies are really able to leverage the information then to rule out exceptions and streamline efficiencies. The variables of a segmentation strategy include not only the variables within a company, but the many different players external to the company's four walls. So just looking at this chart, everyone's seen something similar before. You're talking about your suppliers, your finance, your buyers, the transportation providers, customs, of course, and the customers themselves, and there's many different parties. So we've talked a lot here about the statistics about what people are looking at, but I did want to spend a minute here to talk about as people engage on segmentation activities, a key component is making sure that each external party completely understands their role in the supply chain segment and what information is required of them and what the objectives are of the process. We find that communication and business transformation management is one of the key areas that companies need to focus on if they're going to have a successful segmentation strategy. And that involves having quarterly reviews with your partners, as many of you do today, as well as annual reviews. But include in here the segmentation performance. Let them understand how their performance or lack of performance is influencing the end-to-end supply chain. The strategic goals we see across all of our customers as they embark on these strategies is they're segmenting to grow revenue. Mike, you mentioned a few minutes ago how folks are looking at serviceability. So how, customers are being served, are they making the product unique to that customer? Are they having a good experience with the brand? How do I ensure that service helps to bring that customer back to me? How do I ensure that my new emerging markets have a similar brand feel? So revenue growth is a key component of segmentation. Asset utilization, of course, feeds into the efficiency and cost reductions, but really having this push to grow revenue as well as at the same time a real push to reduce cost. And sometimes those two seem like they don't belong together. And that's why if you have a supply chain segmentation activity that spans the complete end-to-end supply chain, everyone's aligned with what are the goals. It's to service that customer, retain them, grow the revenue, while making sure we do that as efficiently as possible. So perhaps there's ways for the different business units, maybe even to help with asset utilization. Perhaps there's a way to employ DC bypass in some cases in order to serve that customer better. Maybe the efficiency and cost reductions include shifting modes when the time to delivery isn't important for that particular segment. So there are a lot of different aspects of this, but as the folks gather to talk about supply chain segmentation, there should be goals and objectives related to each one of these categories: revenue growth, asset utilization, and efficiency. I think you talked about transportation management a minute ago, Mike, as being one of the key supply chain challenges right now is the rising transportation costs. So it's no wonder here and no surprise that some of the solutions first focus on transportation management. I think everybody understands the traditional transportation management. It helps to optimize the route plans and the load plans. Where we're seeing another opportunity here for our customers is that the transportation management systems are ensuring compliance with the contracts that have been negotiated. Oftentimes, companies will spend 2-3 months pulling together their annual freight bids and selecting their carriers. And at the end of the year, they find out that some of their regions have been using their own carriers and that all of the rates have not been leveraged. Perhaps they've been charged even some surcharges that they shouldn't have according to their contract. So ensuring compliance with those global contracts is a key strategy for supply chain segmentation. The problem here is that as you have different regions, if you go remember back to the charts I showed before where you had functional systems, you have functional systems at the regional level often, and they don't have exposure to what those global contracts are or the transportation management routing guides. So making those available across segments is a key component to a segmentation strategy. It enables the segments to leverage what's been done globally, but for their particular cost structure. Also, managing detention and demurrage is a key component that is focused on transportation and management, as well as freight audit. If companies align their decisions, who to book with, and how they leverage those ocean contracts on a regular basis, and they're using the freight audits, the industry standards, and this just isn't related to Amber Road, but the industry statistics show a 2 to 5% savings for customers who are deploying transportation management solutions, and that's 2 to 5% savings for their transportation spend. You can see the other solutions here, include the traditional order fulfillment, sales and operations planning, and reading down the list here, these are all traditional supply chain management solutions, but they're being deployed by our best, supply chain managers at a segment level. So as they can, they're leveraging the global solutions, but then they're really tailoring it to meet their specific segment needs. So obviously sales and operations planning is looking at things by a business line, but even within a business line, they're looking at particular segments. Analytics and big data provides the ability to mine the data for trends and analysis and make sure that shifts are needed when necessary. And ultimately the goal here with a lot of the analytics capabilities is to reduce that variability. As you reduce variability, you're increasing your supply chain efficiency. So we're excited to see that with the emerging technologies and solutions out there, as companies are segmenting their products, they're able to integrate these solutions across their functions, even if it means a loosely coupled scenario when they have multiple ERP or best-of-breed functional systems. This next chart is focused on the use of supplier management solutions. And no surprise here again, as they're segmenting by product as the key priority, they're also using supplier management solutions by product, grouping by product. So as our customers come to us to deploy our supplier portal capabilities, they are not saying, I want to do this globally across all of my suppliers. They're traditionally having a rollout plan by segment or by product grouping. And you can see those are the first two, by product or by line of business. It's less traditional to start at a region level or, by another category not yet here defined. But as you look at the region requirements, you may find that there are certain documentation, there are certain custom requirements that are required at a region level across all suppliers. So it's important as you engage in a supplier management solution for it to be multi-leveled. So you may be focusing on a product, but you want to be able to layer in the specifics to that line of business as well as to any regional requirements that there are. The key opportunity is to make it easier for the suppliers to be compliant with your segment rules. It's tough for the suppliers to keep up with everything they have on their plates. Oftentimes, they're not electronically capable. So as you're deploying supplier management solutions, you want to make rekeying something that they hardly ever have to do, if ever. You want to make sure that any specific rules you have for that supplier base or that segment are embedded in that software. You don't want to have a vanilla packaged software solution that then allows a whole bunch of optional fields which may or may not get entered. So supplier management solutions today are becoming more tailored to be able to be customized at that segment level. So if we go to the next slide, it really talks about, making those solutions tailorable. It talks about how important is the flexibility of information systems. So I believe everybody surveyed believes that flexibility is important, 61%. Perhaps some of these other respondents haven't tried to implement supplier solutions or other of these solutions across their segments. But as we talk to companies who have multi-products, hundreds of SKUs, hundreds of suppliers, it's very important for our customers to be able to have configured systems. The requirements are different by product group, and to try and align requirements to have a superset of all the necessary requirements is just not possible. It used to be the structure back in the 1990s that if you had a supply chain management solution, you would take the lowest common denominator of your requirements across all your segments, your entire supply chain, and you would just go and your goal would be to get those 10 or 15 data elements that were the same from each supplier. Today's mode is let's make our supply chain systems very specific to the segment, very flexible. Let's enforce business processes where they're needed to ensure compliance, to ensure that the information needed for that segment is met and that the processes are adhering to the rules that you have set up for that particular supply chain. So we find that our customers are at least very demanding of us. Maybe they're not of other vendors, but very demanding of us for very flexible systems that can be changed and can be dynamically adjusted as needed as their segments are changing. Okay. So if you go to the next chart here, I think, Mike, when we sent out the survey, I know we have a great group of folks that responded, and I think probably the folks that responded are very interested in this topic. I'm pleased to see that so many companies feel that supply chain segmentation is important, because I know, especially in this economy, that as people are looking to grow revenues, and many of those are doing that through international business, as one of the first charts showed, they're also realizing that they have the constant issue of rising transportation costs and just the rising cost of an ever more complex global supply chain. So they're really focusing on segmentation as a way to identify and to remove inefficiencies. So I'm glad to see that most everybody feels that supply chain segmentation is important. Okay, tasks handled by logistics service providers. This probably is very similar, Mike, to what your publications have been talking about in the past, 3 to 5 years. The logistics service providers are really doing a great job for customers in terms of providing some of the information that allows our customers to manage specific segments. So tracking shipments, clearing customs, generating shipment documentation. The expectations by product line are most likely different within a customer for each one of those, and certainly for the customer's customer. So there are some customers I know that expect the 3PL to not only provide them information, but also to provide information to their customers. The 3PLs are also supporting a lot of that delayed packaging, a lot of those strategic services to our customers that enable them to apply better inventory management in the segment. So the logistics providers are a key enabler for supply chain segmentation. Okay, so just a few use cases here, and Mike, I'm trying to speed this along so we have time for some questions at the end. Our first is transportation management. We've talked a little bit about the use case before. So in this particular use case, we have a customer who's a global manufacturer. They have several product groups. They have 14 global ocean contracts that they renew annually. They have their logistics operations are done at a regional level. So their challenge was, how do I manage my transportation costs? How do I make sure that my regional users are using the preferred carriers? How do I make sure that I'm paying the freight bills and that those freight bills match up with what I've contracted with my carriers? So their solution was to have a centralized system where all of their regional users could gain access to those contracts, where they could perform their freight audit, and where their origin operations could understand what their route guides are. And the benefit was obviously a reduced transportation spend and optimized carrier selection. It was interesting because the carriers were also happy to see this go in place as well, especially the preferred carriers who were expecting a certain amount of freight as a result of their contract. This customer also achieved that 2 to 5% savings that I referenced earlier. Okay, the next use case we have is with a customer who is using our trade agreements capability. They have over 50,000 SKUs. They source from 22 countries, just a global company by all means. They have 6 main sales channels and 9 key product groups. So the challenge here is that they really did not have a way to view how all of the products were being classified and to monitor to make sure that the segments of these different product groups were following the correct regulatory compliance rules and had the corrected duty rates. And there was no visibility at all to the global customs costs. So once again, the approach was to centralize the system that all of their regional operations could access. By doing that, they were able to identify which products were eligible for certain trade agreements and preferential programs. And so by doing that, they were able to lower their product costs by qualifying for the preferential duties. They implemented a supplier solicitation capability that helped to streamline the process by which a company has to collect and qualify suppliers. So the benefit here, too, was to lower the manual cost associated with implementing a trade agreement program. So the last use case I want to share with you is a customer who's using our supply chain performance management and analytics capability. They have 6 brands. They're a growing retailer. In fact, their purchase orders have just skyrocketed through the roof. They're managing probably double just this year what they did last year. They're sourcing in 20 countries, and they have 25 carriers. As they've grown internationally, they've had a challenge in terms of how many lanes they need to manage, the origin-destination lanes. They've also wanted to make sure that they have agility to respond to the new markets that their sales and marketing teams are going after. So they want to do that with a global customer experience, and they want to be able to move quickly to meet that market demand. They're spending a lot of time with origin management now to make sure that the orders are correct and that they're optimized at the origin so that the rest of their distribution cycle can be streamlined. They bypass the DC when possible. Sometimes they're doing direct-to-store shipments. So they have a lot of challenges that they're trying to handle as a result of their growth. So the solution they put in place was to have, once again, a system that was available to all of their regions, to all of the brands, and it was a solution that also extended out through their trading partners and origin operations. So by connecting the suppliers in with the freight forwarders for the origin management, the freight forwarders were able to get advanced shipment notices from the suppliers, and that helped them with the documentation and the shipment planning. At that point, the sales and marketing team was able to alert logistics of here are my hot products that I'm trying to manage into this region. So the hot shipments, we call it hot shipments, was enabled so that the priority could be given at those origin operations to handle that particular inventory for that segment. So hot shipment management allowed the 3PLs at origin the ability to understand what should be a priority shipment and give that keen attention. Of course, if there are any exceptions that occur at origin or with the supplier, those would generate an alert. As we're connected with their 25 global carriers and freight forwarders, we'll receive information as to what are the key events that are happening along the way. Oftentimes we find that as customers are implementing these solutions, they look first to how are the carriers doing, what is the carrier performance. And what they'll often find is that the opportunity really is in the handoff points between the origin operations and the carrier, or at destination with customs, or even within their own rules about split shipments and delivery. By implementing a solution for another customer, what they found was that the time between when the goods were delivered by the carrier, which the carrier was performing very well, and the time that they received in the inventory was what was drawing out their supply chain. So event management here is a key capability for this customer to understand exceptions and to make sure they're servicing those emerging markets well. So as you're managing exceptions and you're gathering the data, a key benefit has been, of course, the reduction of the supply chain variability. So as you're doing order lead times, and going back to one of the solutions that people are putting in place, often when you're doing order and demand planning, you need to understand what are my real cycle times for my order. And without that data, people put in a lot of buffer. So they might think that it takes 35 days for an end-to-end supply chain, and when they implement a supply chain visibility solution, they find out that in actuality it's only 29 days. So by putting in the real amount of days into an order planning system, folks can reduce the inventory buffer that they have built up. So the variability in the inventory buffer has saved this company a lot of money, and they've ensured brand consistency as they're going into new markets. All right, just a couple more slides here, Mike, and then we'll be ready for questions. You asked me to put together a couple charts to talk about customer trends, and I think overall we're seeing just customers demanding a much more granular level of information about their supply chain. They're looking at how are my supply chains serviced differently. So in some cases, am I saying I'm going to deliver to the consumer to the door within 24 hours of their shipping, or is this something that's a replenishment type supply chain and I can take a lower cost of transportation? Interesting next trend here is that we're seeing some customers really take a hard look at sustainability. So some of their customers are saying, well, I'd be willing to pay, a premium here, and this is more a consumer market, for a product that I know has had some green manufacturing as well as some green distribution applied. So that's an interesting trend I'm seeing in one of the segment variables when I'm talking to customers. Let's see, I'm just going to pick out a couple of these other ones, and I'm sure we'll send out these charts if people want to read more into the details here. The thing that's important here is that as our customers are looking at segmentation, they're looking at not just the product cost, or they're looking at not just the logistics cost. They're really looking across departments to optimize the total landed cost. And that's a new trend here that I've seen in the past couple of years that we never saw in the past. And in order to do that, they're also developing more strategic relationships with each other within the company as well as with the partners that help service them. From a solution standpoint, they're really requiring solutions that can be easily extended to their partners. It used to be that the trend was just to play the vendor heavy hand and say, you need to provide electronic commerce, or I need you to log into my proprietary, portal, and you're just going to, have to do it, or you'll need to make the investment, and I'm not going to help you out, supplier. The attitude now is realizing that suppliers are an important part of the supply chain, and if information is needed from them and it's not something that's easily managed in their own systems, our customers are helping their suppliers meet the requirements by providing them access to systems. And those systems are understood that they need to be as efficient as possible, given the location and the capability of some of these suppliers. Our customers are really trying to make it easy for the suppliers to participate in the supply chain segmentation program without investing a whole lot of money or technology on their own side. And this is especially true if you're looking at an OEM manufacturer. It's unreasonable for them to invest in a lot of technology if they're not going to be manufacturing that product for a very long time. We also talked about flexibility a few minutes ago, and as they're looking at solutions, they're also looking for partners who can provide access to the global trade data that's changing, whether it's the preferential trade programs or it's the fact that they're changing carriers from year to year, and they want to have a provider that can provide them that connectivity to their logistics network. So they need a vendor that's flexible and can provide them some key information as well. I think that's about my time limit you gave me, Mike. Thank you very much.
Absolutely, Stephanie. A terrific job today. Absolutely terrific job of going through, not just going through what we found in our research, but obviously putting some great perspective behind the data as well as the case studies. That you have such a unique perspective there working with so many global shippers. Now, I want to let everybody know who is attending our event today. Please keep those questions coming on in. We have time for a few questions today while we're online with you. If we don't get to your question today, we're going to package it up and make sure that Stephanie can get back to you via email as quickly as possible. Stephanie, just one quick comment. I really like the way you referenced how companies, especially now with more sophisticated, or should I say more complex global supply chain challenges in front of them, the communication across departments is really something we're seeing, too, in our reporting these days. When we're doing case studies, we're digging deeper into folks who are really trying to put some solutions into place that are going to help them with some bigger global visibility across the board. And boy, that is something terrific to see, that the departments are actually chatting to each other, and everybody's kind of getting on the same page. And I'm assuming that's what you're seeing in some of your more forward-thinking clients these days.
Right, that's right. It used to be when we talked to customers, they were, their big idea of segmentation was, I'm going to have an international transportation department and a domestic transportation department, right? Or they talked about manufacturing. Yep. So now everyone's getting together and really looking at it globally versus just regionally or functionally.
Mm-hmm. Now, Stephanie, here's a question that came off the floor, and one actually I had jotted down here as we were kind of when you were going through your presentation piece. From your unique perspective there, I mean, how have you seen segmentation change over the years, and what would you say, what's really driving it these days? And my gut instinct's telling me that those changing customer demands, those new emerging markets, the demands into those emerging markets, is that the key driver these days? I mean, how's it changed over the last few years, and what are the key drivers there changing it?
Right. I think the key drivers are focusing on that revenue growth in a very tight economy. So it's forcing people to look past that one-dimensional view. So how am I going to reach new markets? How am I going to sell new product? Mm-hmm. And by doing that, how am I going to do it in the most efficient way? So absolutely, I think you're right, Mike. It's the market that's driving it, and it's interesting to see all the departments come together, and I think they are actually enjoying it.
Yeah, I think you're absolutely right. We have done a few case studies over the last year and a half where we've actually put the highlight on that and how the different departments, including marketing, which is such an important part of what's driving so many retailers these days, and they can get the chance to sit at the table with the supply chain teams to make sure that everything is kind of flowing in the right directions at the right times. Now, Stephanie, one thing we do like to do when we have someone with your unique perspective and experience on the line for these types of sessions, there are so many folks who are in the audience today who are here for a reason. They're considering segmentation. They're doing it in certain levels, and then maybe they're planning a review heading into 2013. What are some of the recommendations you might have for companies that are either planning a supply chain segmentation program or process, or maybe looking to review what they've already have set up here heading into the new year?
Right. One of the things I love about some of the progressive companies I'm working with who have segmentation strategies is that they have a supply chain manager for each segment.
Right.
I think that's just wonderful. You have one owner that's responsible for pulling together all the parties. So I think it's also interesting to go in and to have a session where you bring, the different functional groups together, or key individuals who can see the forest as well as the trees,
right.
Someone who's detail-oriented and has the big picture in mind, and have them come up with what are all the different variables that they're seeing in their supply chain. And a lot's going to be related to service, what's unique to their particular customer segment. But there's also going to be some very specific transportation and even shipping aspects of that as well. So once all the variables can be defined, then you can identify how dynamic are those variables and how common are they with the rest of my organization. You sit down, understand the variables. I would even bring in some outside resources to help provide that analytical perspective and guidance. And make sure you engage, going back to a very important part of success, is make sure you engage with the business transformation team to make sure you're communicating internally and externally what the goals are, and once the segmentation strategy is there, how you're going to disable the old behaviors and encourage the new ones.
Right, absolutely. That's a great takeaway, Stephanie. If there was one takeaway, maybe for those folks who are attending today, based off the research, was there one particular element or one particular piece of information or data we gleaned from that unique group of respondents that you might want to have resonate with our readers as we or our attendees today as we wrap up?
Well, I think most of your surveys here are very confidential, Mike, but I would say if you were to look at the folks who believe that segmentation is very important, that if you could dive into who the respondents are, I bet those are the customers that probably have the best gross margins out there, and they're the leaders. Yep. So I believe there's a lot of opportunity, a lot of cost reductions, a lot of potential to encourage customer retention and revenue growth if you employ a segmentation strategy and you take it down to a level of detail that goes beyond what you're traditionally hearing about.
Right, absolutely. Well, Stephanie, Miles, terrific job today in putting context around these findings, and I want to thank everybody for attending today. If you did ask a question today, we will make sure that all those questions are gathered and fired over to Stephanie via email, just to make sure she can get back to you in a timely fashion. Well, Stephanie, great job, and thank you so much for joining us today.
Thank you, Mike.
Right, thank you.